Shipoi, so in this video presentation I want to share a story with you of someone that came into my life, and when that happened I wasn't very clear what to do with it, but that person said she felt very connected with me and she wanted to work with me because she wanted to find out who she really is. So obviously I offered her my Reiki session, but I felt that this person would require a lot more. So I started to dig deeper, dive deeper, develop deeper, explore more, like, okay, so what is that I have been through, right? What was my personal story that led me eventually to where I am today and where I am going, and having a look at this journey, like, hey, how could I help others to navigate through a similar journey? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share a story with you of someone that would probably come to me for coaching, advice or healing. This is not really the exact story of the person that came into my life, but eventually I started to see like, hey, you know what, I think like more people are dealing with these kind of things. But obviously we're talking about the intuitive sensitive who has been through, let's say, an emotional abusive narcissistic relationship, whether it be with personal relationships like marriage, or perhaps in your work career, or maybe with one of your family members. So let's dive straight in, and then of course I will also explain the 3 steps of where you might be going through, and then of course what you can do about it in order to really find out who you really are, what are your gifts, what might be your purpose in life, how to really find out your own truth, your sense of self, how to develop empathy, sympathy, and of course authenticity, because that's probably really what you're looking for, is to realign with your true authentic self so you can develop more deeper meaningful connections with others. Alright, so let's dive straight in. So let's explore the story of Alejandra. She is married with a very successful and wealthy businessman. At the surface she seems to have it all, such as multiple estates around the world. Therefore she has to travel a lot. She's part of many social clubs and she always has plenty of things to do when it comes to social obligations. She does not have to work as her husband is the main provider. However, she feels trapped at obtaining this perfect image towards the outside world. She's realizing it's all just a facade. She constantly feels the pressure, stress and worries from living this lifestyle. Worries in the sense that she fears she's going to disappoint people if she's going to follow her own intuition or heart desire. She's scared for losing her identity. She was married to her husband 20 years ago. Her husband was like her savior because of her previous failed and emotional abusive relationships. Yet she feels that her current marriage doesn't really give her the freedom to explore and express her own unique gifts. She constantly has to be there for him, to support him, and guide him on his journey of growing his business and investments. All these so-called social obligations she has is more about reputation management than meeting her own friends. She tells herself they are her friends, but only when it comes to maintaining their reputation. She could not really express her deepest feelings to them, as she fears to be judged, ashamed or seen as weak or vulnerable. She feels neglected by her own husband because all that matters is his own reputation, which she has to maintain as well. He promised her the lifestyle of comfort and luxury, but expected many conditions in return. Her marriage feels like a business contract. Alejandra struggles to find her own truth, who she really is, where she belongs, to who she belongs, what is her purpose. She desires to be authentic but has no idea what exactly that means. She wants to find her own gifts and passions. Maybe it's art, such as painting, playing the piano or writing poetry. Yet every attempt she has done so far has been neglected or disapproved, as it cannot be added to the agenda of the family, as she always has to be there for others. She's very empathetic, compassionate, sensitive, and she likes to maintain the peace in the household. Therefore she survives by pleasing others. Yet she displeases herself at a deeper level. She feels very connected to the nature and wishes to spend more time in it, just to be with herself, to think, feel, gain clarity over her life and take a few steps back in order to step up. Yet every time she does, she feels a very deep loneliness or sadness. She would like to explore her spirituality more often without feeling the fear of being judged or ashamed by others. Yet every time she wants to go into nature, she must create an excuse to slip out and be invisible. So when she wakes up in the morning, the first thing she will do in the morning is to listen to her husband about his plans for the day. Listening and empathize about his worries regarding a case in courthouse about a business deal. As he sucked up all his worries and fears, she's then prepped for the day. The day hasn't really started yet and she already feels tired and drained by his controlling attitude and behavior. But she can't give in as he has to prepare the kids. They are his kids from an in-between relationship he had with a mistress. She thought she forgave him because she knew he would be a better man with her love, care and compassion. However, something has been broken that cannot really seem to be healed anymore. But life goes on. After the school run, she meets a few ladies at the tennis club. These are the wives of her husband's business partners. This is a great way to dig up conversations these ladies had with their husbands so she can report this later to her own husband. She would then have a long conversation to check in with her husband to see how the case went. After that, she has to plan another birthday kit for some kid so everybody they know can come over and meet. Then she has to prepare their next holiday trip to the lake house in Connecticut, where all their friends can come over for an anniversary. Then she heard that one of her family members in Bogota, Colombia is ill and she's worried now she has to get a flight together very soon. As she feels like collapsing for a moment because of her tiredness, emptiness and loneliness, she then has to hold her emotions a little bit longer as someone else from the family needed her attention. And the list goes on and on and on of always being there for others but not for herself. Now, I'm not really quite sure if you can relate to this. Of course, this is a very unique story of someone, which is of course related to personal relationship, marriage. And maybe perhaps you're dealing with another kind of emotional abusive relationship, let's say in your work, career related area, or perhaps in your family related area. But sometimes these forms of narcissism are like very subtle, right? You don't really notice it that much and you think it's kind of like the norm. It's like a compromise you have to make for something else, something else good and beautiful in return. Yet, we don't really realize sometimes how this form of emotional abuse can actually damage our sense of self, right? Which we're going to talk about, which can form deep feelings of isolation within yourself. So let's talk about, the 3 stages you might be going through. And of course, I will also share a little bit more of my own personal, experiences with it. So, you can relate maybe a little bit more before we're going to talk about, okay, so what exactly can you do about it in order to find your own way in life? Now, the first stage is actually when you are in the midst of it, right? This is like, when you are absolutely almost like in the center of the hurricane, in the center of the storm, but not just in the eye of it, because the eye of the storm is like, like almost like a peaceful, very, kind of environment, which maybe sometimes you could have a glimpse of, but that is like sudden, I would say almost like a sudden sense of alignment, where you suddenly step all above your dramas and your stories that you are so attached to, and you suddenly get a very profound insight, for example, like almost like a spiritual profound insight that can shake things up, which is going to it's like it's kind of like messing with your identity, because your identity is so attached to the dramas and the stories and whatnot. So you think like, okay, that is who you are. So it suddenly is going to almost like break through that false identity you have about yourself, which wants to show you something much greater. And it's almost like feels like, this could be a sign of that there is like light at the end of the tunnel, right? So the first stage is like you are in the middle of the war zone, right? Now, if we're going to explore a few characteristics of what exactly is going on, let me give you a couple of personal examples. So my mother divorced from my father because of his very subtle forms of narcissism. And as a child, I always was like, pretty sensitive child. I think I was already picking up feelings of fear for my mother. So when my mother decided, okay, I want to have this divorce, my father, in all his rage, he kicked us out of the house in the middle of the night, me together with my brother and my mother, and we went to live at my grandmother's place for a while, the mother for my mother, until my mother decided, okay, you know what, I found my own place elsewhere, far away from this town. So I resisted that idea to go with her. So that's why I decided, you know what, I want to stay here in this place, I want to stay with my father, I don't want this sudden change, and so on. So I had to walk away a couple of times before my father decided to go and start a case in courthouse in order to win the custody over me. So divorce was when I was 10, my first case in courthouse when I was 11 and a half, which we lost because they decided that the mother should get the custody over the younger children. And then we had a second case in courthouse when I was 12 years old, and we kind of won. My father kind of won this case in courthouse because he was like kind of like getting the custody over me, but on the condition that I would, you know, follow a child protection scheme, right, from, you know, social workers, institutions, you know, the child protection force, whatever you want to call it, which was until I was like 16 years old. My brother went to live with my mother. So, you know, we didn't really see each other that much. So it was like, you know, the family was completely ripped up. And my father was constantly fighting, so there was like a lot of power and control drama going on of trying also to win the custody over my younger brother. So my home environment was like, you know, he was constantly coming home in his furious and anger. There was like, you know, violence, not so much against me, but more in general. So for me, it kind of felt like a place, an environment that felt very unsafe. And not secure. Every time when he was coming home, it felt like, okay, is he going to peacefully neglect me, right? So I won't be seen, or is he coming out in his anger, in his rage, in his outburst and whatnot, right? So that was kind of how it felt for a very long time, and it was like I was starting to hold my breath. It was kind of starting to hold my breath, and I wasn't really able to speak out my own, you know, truth and such. So I was holding on to this anger, and that was why I started to struggle in school, and I had my own anger and aggressive and violent outbursts against other kids in school. So, you know, I was kind of like an aggressive person myself as well, until I started to learn to release my anger, going into boxing, kickboxing, and that sort of things. But the first stage is really like, you know, you are in the midst of it, right? You are very unconscious, there's not much self-awareness going on, you feel a victim, you're holding your breath, you know, you also feel you constantly need to be there for that person, because that person needs your emotional, you know, attention, right? So that person needs the help, and you need to heal that person, you need to please that person, you need to stay there for that person, right? Because, you know, you feel so sad for them, you see them as the victim. Even when that person would kick you out of the household hundreds of times, every time you feel like, okay, I need to go back, right? I cannot go anywhere else. So it feels like kind of like in prison. It's a very contracted feeling. You feel like very trapped and you have no idea how to get out of there. When I came out of high school, when I was 17 years old, I mean, I was definitely done with school. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to join the Dutch Marine Corps, because fighting, survival, that was something I was already familiar with, right? Aggression, violence, that was already very familiar to me. So that's what I wanted to do, and of course I wanted to escape as far as possible. But my father convinced me to go to college to study something, and yeah, eventually I lost that kind of conversation because I was only 17 years old. So eventually I, you know, went to college. I went for my local place, I went to Rotterdam, so I went to study. So when I started to study, I think that was kind of how I slowly went to the next stage, stage number 2. Because as soon as I started to study, I felt like, you know, I'm getting more out of the house, I'm getting older, I'm becoming a little bit more mature, I'm trying to find my own way. I had my various jobs, and eventually that job turned into a part-time business besides my studies. So I felt like, hey, I started to feel a little bit more empowered. I'm carving my own path. And I felt very motivated in order to start my own business and make my own money, because financial challenges was also a thing in our household. So I started to feel a bit more empowered, a bit more independence. I bought my own car. It was like, you know what, now I'm going from the stage where I constantly got neglected and disapproved and ashamed and feeling guilty of many things, and I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I cannot do anything, to a stage where, you know what, I'm starting something for myself, I'm creating something for myself. And it's kind of like, you know what, I'm kind of like, I get motivated in order to prove myself, right? So that's kind of like slowly going into the next stage, is where you create a bit more independence. You're making your own money, you're carving your own path. You also feel a sense of, you know what, I want to prove myself, right? I want to prove myself to the world. And you go from the stage where you felt very fearful, very suppressed, to a little bit more expressive. But your examples of the world, it's still like, the world is unsafe, it's insecure, no one can be trusted, you are still in this kind of like fight survival mode. Your amygdala is like overstimulated. You still have feelings of deep isolation going on, but right now you really want to show to the world what you're capable of. And I see like a lot of young entrepreneurs, they have that, right, where they want to show like, hey, this is what I can do, this is what I can capable of, I'm going to make a lot of money, don't care what has to happen for that, I just want to make it happen. So that's how I was. First, when I finished college, I was working for a corporation in the shipping industry, and that was also where I kind of sold my car cleaning business equipment, because I was taught that it would be better to have a stable job and such. But then I started to struggle with depression, right? I felt so isolated, and my first feelings that something was missing was back in 2006, when I was around 20, 21, 22 years old, where I had my own car, I had my own sailing boats, and I was of course sailing on the lakes, being in nature, beautiful. But also I felt, every time when I came back from sailing, I felt a deep feeling of sadness and isolation. That was really my pain point. That was kind of the pain I was carrying. And of course we think, because we are still not very self-aware, very self-conscious, something is still missing. Maybe it's a partner, right? Maybe it's a girlfriend or something like that. And we look for things externally in order to fill up that void. That started when I was like 21 years old or something. So we're still in the stage number 2, where we are trying to fill up this void, right? Maybe we want to prove our worth through accomplishments. Maybe we want to make a bunch of money ourselves. We want to climb a corporate ladder. We want success. We want everything, right? We want independence. We want freedom, and you name it. Which is still not in a very balanced and harmonious way. We're still not really coming from a place of joy, love and compassion. We're still coming from a place of fear and lack. So in this stage, you're kind of starting slowly to realize, okay, so now I have proved my worth through accomplishments, but still something is missing, still something is off. This is still not me. I still feel a bunch of fear and sadness and isolation. I still feel stressed, anxious, worried and whatnot. So then you're slowly going to move to the next phase, which is also a very interesting one and can also be quite challenging. It can be quite challenging just as the first one, because it's going to mess up your entire personal identity. Let me explain. And this is probably why you found me. Stage number 3 is, you had your success, you proved your worth through accomplishments, you finally got the recognition from that person, that emotional, who was a bit emotional abusive in his own unconscious way. Not that he is such a bad person, but because he was also, or he or she was also emotional abused. So that was his programming, his conditioning that he passed on to you. And now you collected some of this narcissistic programming yourself. You're also a bit conditioned in that way, where you also feel this deep feeling of isolation and separation from others, where there's lack of trust. You don't feel safe, secure, and whatnot, and you think you have to manipulate others, take power and control over others to get your own needs met. But you now actually, your conscious starts to play in, and that's your gift. You're much more conscious, much more self-aware, and you start to realize that's not who I want to be, right? I want to find out who I really am. And then you go to the next stage number 3, which is, you're starting the journey of self-awareness, self-discovery, and self-healing. And for me, that started back in 2012. I kind of had a massive breakthrough back then. So what happened is that I was very busy with my internet business, making my money, driving a nice car, and receiving the recognition from my father to say, son, I'm proud of you. And once I got that recognition, it felt like all my drive, all my motivation suddenly fell away. I started to sabotage everything. I started to sabotage my business. I went completely bankrupt. I was completely burnt out, high levels of stress, anxiety, you name it. But at the time I was invited by someone from my mailing list, because I was also talking about personal development besides making money online, because personal development is needed to make a lot of money. But I was invited to join a spiritual retreat workshop. So what happened is that I sat there at the back of the room. I was very closed, of course, arms crossed, legs crossed. I was feeling very nervous, but eventually I was asked to come on stage, right, to meet the healer and say what I was going through, because I was very judgmental, right? I was very judgmental. I was seeing all these people with these crazy purple wearing clothes, and I had my ideas around it, right? So I was very judgmental, but eventually I was like, okay, fine, let's do this. I must be here for a reason. And the healer asked, okay, so what can I do for you? Why are you here? And I was like, you tell me, right? You're the healer. I was the smartass. I thought I had all the answers, right? I was having all these masks that was protecting me. She asked, so what do you feel? And I said, I don't know. I don't feel anything at all. That is how I was, numbed down. I just so good at numbing myself down, right? Suppressing my own feelings and emotions and not being in touch with that. So what I was going through, I was like, okay, she asked, so do you fear to feel your own feelings? And when that happened, I speak many times about this, it was like, I suddenly shifted in another state of consciousness. Like I was stepping way out of my story, that I was telling for myself. I was stepping way above my personal identity, way above my, sense of self. And from that moment, I knew I had to commit to spirituality. I knew I had to commit to spiritual development. So that's what I started to do. From 2012, I started with a year and a half of spirit coaching, where I really started to, break through my own armor that I built up for so long, right? That also caused my deep feelings of isolation. A bit forward, of course, 2013, I came to London, start all over, but during that time, a couple of years, I went through a lot of ups and downs. I was burnt out, I was depressed, I was feeling anxious, very stressful. I had no work, I had no money, I was living for my savings, I was unemployable until I really had to go to work. I didn't want to, so I found, of course, another job in marketing, and within 2 weeks I got fired for that, because I was unable to work. I didn't want to work. My image was like, I gotta be this successful business guy, and I'm not good enough, to just have a job. I need this status and whatnot. And then I really started to lower myself, and I took on various taxi driving jobs, and that really was very painful for my identity. That was also pretty narcissistic. That needed to have that image of success and status and significance, right? And doing that, I had so much resistance against that. And if we eventually, after going through various taxi driving jobs, I had so much anxiety that I again stepped away from that, went back to the Netherlands, had another job, came back to London, and eventually, that's another characteristic of stage number 3. Eventually, when you go through these high peaks and these deep downs of stress, anxiety, eventually it feels like you're going through a little bit more of calmer waters, right? That was kind of like, okay, I came back to London 2016, I believe so, and that's where I took on a very peaceful, quiet job that, just paid the bills. I was just okay. I was becoming a little bit more humble. I learned that, because I was bringing in so much stress to our household and to our relationship with my girlfriend as well, that I was like, okay, maybe I need to calm down a little bit, right? Tune down a little bit, right? Doing so, it also gave me the abilities to, start exploring further who I really am, right? What do I stand for? What are my gifts? What is my purpose? What is that I love and enjoy doing, right? What is that I want to do, right? So all these questions, that was something I started to explore further and further and further, going to different kind of spiritual workshops, retreats, going through shamanic healing, completing Reiki, right? So all these different kind of things actually, explored my journey further. Okay, I started to dive deeper in myself, and that is kind of like exactly what I want to offer you as well. If you are currently, let's say, in either stage 2 or stage 3, then of course I want to help you, and that is actually, is to offer you my, I would say, empathetic mirror, perhaps. I'm not really someone that says, okay, I've got all the answers. I've done there, I've been there, done that. I got an all-end solution, right? That will be easy, right? But more like, hey, where is it that you're currently at? What is that you need to become aware of? What is that you need to embrace and accept in order to move further? What kind of thoughts and feelings are currently going on? That, of course, you need to be aware of, because once you can become aware of that, you can move further and further and further. So it's more about, intuitive mindfulness coaching is to become really much more aware about yourself, where you're currently at, what is that you want to let go of, in order you start to you can start to embrace more of who do you want to be, right? It's all about learning to align yourself more with your true self. And of course, the best way to practice that is in nature, because in nature it actually very helps you to, let go more of your stress and everything that is going on, is to totally relax and, really connect with the present moments, right? With the flow of life. And that's really where you can, step above your stories, the dramas you are telling yourself. It's where you can step above your egocentric identity that is much more concerned with your need for survival and feeling safe and secure, and really tuning into, let's say, the higher aspects of yourself. So that's what I want to offer you, is intuitive mindfulness coaching, nature therapy, forest bathing, where we can work together one-on-one in nature and explore exactly who do you are and who do you choose to be and where do you want to go. So if you want to learn more about this, then of course feel free to reach out. We can have a personal conversation first, and then we can discuss further how we can work together. All right, so of course also feel free to leave a comment below if you want to react or share your thoughts. But if you want, of course, like a private conversation, just go to my contact page and send me a message. All right, Paul here, take care for now, bye bye.